from, okay, for us to be able to continue to master life. When you then decide that you're going to take on someone else's value systems that are alien to your own genetic repertoire of how you're to behave, it creates a chemical conflict in the body as far as the blood chemistry. You actually have a chemical war going on within you because the genes already, the cells already in the body know what they're supposed to do. But now you're actively saying, no, we're not going to do that because Joe Blow over here said we're supposed to do X. So you're making new chemicals from your thoughts that are now going into your cells to tell your cells what to do, and your cells are like no. You know, this is what we're supposed to be doing over here. And then you have to consciously, you know, override these natural inclinations to get this result. Now, the end result of this chemical war manifests as dis-ease. And in the case of uterine fibroids, it manifests as abnormal tissue formation in the womb. Now, what are the thoughts that actually create this disease in the womb or in the prostate gland? Okay? Now, this is something that's very interesting because every organ in the body has its own particular frequency. Like all livers have a particular frequency of energy and photon vibration. All livers. Okay, so if you can just stay with me now and think of the visible light spectrum. You have red, a wavelength of red. But in the wavelength of red, you have chartreuse, you have scarlet, you have magenta, you have pink, you have all of these different frequencies in that wavelength of red. Is that correct? So that's to say that if you can think of the liver, for example, as being a general wavelength of red, okay? Now, whether it's a Caucasian liver or an African liver or an Asian liver, then breaks down to a different color within the red spectrum. Okay, so you can measure two different vibrations of liver activity, one that is for a particular race and one that is for a liver anywhere in the world. Okay, now, then we can go to a different vibration also that can be measured as to whether it's functioning normally or whether it's abnormal. Okay, and all of that information is actually kept in check and in monitor in the cells in your body. That's just how heavy your repertoire of information is. Now, for example, if you decide to begin to entertain thoughts that are totally out of alignment, okay, with what your normal frequencies are, then you're going to begin to start showing symptoms. Now, let's look at what are the thought patterns that cause uterine fibroid disease. What's real interesting, because, again, the uterus is supposed to exhibit certain behavior, and it knows that. The uterus already knows what it's supposed to do. Now, when you begin to think thoughts around the function of the uterus that are alien to what it knows it's supposed to do, you set up an auto-rejection pattern in your body. Now, it's very interesting when we look at the whole cultural patterning of African women. Okay, and I was talking about that with someone just yesterday, and I was saying that most African women, instead of being celebrated into womanhood, okay, are actually doubted and admonished for going into womanhood, because our ancestral mothers have found that very threatening because of their incapacity to have mastered that experience. And so the biggest threat that we get is the fact that you're not supposed to bring any babies here. So that's your first welcome into womanhood. Okay, is that, you know, don't mess around and get pregnant, don't bring babies here, you know, whatever that is on that. 99% of us, that's the welcoming we get. So once that thought is put on your mind, it becomes a chemical reality that then immediately puts the uterus in an irritated state. Because the uterus is like, well, that's what I'm normally supposed to do. And you've already told me now I'm not supposed to even function like I'm supposed to. So it's already been set up very young in age in our cultural values to not function properly. Okay? Now, what about for men with prostate problems? It's the same thing. It's very interesting. Many of the men that I've talked to that have allowed themselves to go on to deteriorate into cancer of the prostate have some real interesting values that they've taken on. Because, see, the African value system, as I understand it, has always been one that always respects the woman, always respects the source from which life comes, and reveres that, whether it's the grandmother or some woman that they haven't met, or whether it's their own daughter. In a Western Eurocentric value system, that is not the case. And so genetically, these men are aware of the fact that their approach to women should be different. However, the cultural value is of something totally different. For example, I had a gentleman who had, an elder who had cancer of the prostate, and he came to me for some physical advice. And as I sat and I talked with him about his belief systems, because what your belief system is tells the cells in your body how they are to function. And if you have a belief system that's alien to the natural functioning of your body, you will automatically have disease. And if you do not change that and come into alignment with your innate value system, you will usually die from it. This is one of the problems with cancer. So as I talked with him, I asked him, was he married? And he said, no, he wasn't. And I said, why? Well, he said, well, it's a long story. I've been separated for 16 years. And I'm like, my goodness, why would you just be separated for 16 years? Why wouldn't you want to just go ahead and get a divorce? Well, his thing was that I really didn't want to invest the money in it or whatever, So I said, okay, fine. So I asked him then what was the issue around the marriage that he divorced. So he went on to tell me that he was a longshoreman and that he spent a lot of time away from home, and that he came home from the sea one evening and found his wife with someone else. And at that point in time, he divorced her. So I'm saying you didn't have any type of conference over this, or, there wasn't any signs and symptoms that led up to this. So, I mean, it was interesting because his ego just jumped right out there. It was like, there was nothing to discuss and this, that, and the other. So I said, oh, okay, fine. So I said, well, were you away from home a lot? So he said, oh, yeah, for months. So I said, oh, okay. I said, so when you were out to sea, what did you do? So he said, well, I had women around, but they didn't mean anything to me. They weren't like my wife. They were just a means of relief. And so I asked him to repeat that statement to himself. Okay, that these women didn't mean anything to you, that they were just a means of relief and release. I said, because you have to understand that the universe has laws that everything in the universe is accountable to. One of them is that what comes around goes around. For every cause, there is an effect. And why did he perceive that perhaps these women that he had a release with perhaps were not the same as his daughter, or the same as his wife, or the same as his sister? Okay, why is it that these women were used as a repository versus his wife was something else different? And so he kind of sat there and he looked at me. But this is some of the main problems on a psychosocial, sexual level that we are having that create the chemical conflict that is destroying our reproductive organs. Because, see, in our own innate culture, that kind of belief system was never allowed. A woman was always a sacred vessel, whether you knew her or not. And she was not a sperm repository. She was not a means of relief. And she had to be approached a particular way. And the same for women. I mean, women did not see themselves as having to disrobe, to be immoral, etc., to be able to get a man, which is a real problem that we're dealing with now, because many women, basically, that's why they dress like they do. And that's why they go to places that they go, because they feel they have to do these things to be able to have companionship. All of these types of behaviors that are predicated upon belief systems and thoughts cause problems with the tissues in our body. So what happens here is that when you look at uterine fibroids, what does it really represent? Well, when we actually took interviews of these women, 98% of them had all had abortions, one or more, which means right away they had some issues about allowing their uterus to do what it normally should do. They had issues around being responsible for their sexuality at some level. Over 60% of them, many of them were single or were single-parent families. Why was that? Because many of them didn't trust men. They had ambivalences about the men that they would be in association with or who they would mate with. And when we have these kind of thoughts that all are focused around the uterus,